Hello, basketball people, we have news. Let's go to more news about the Golden State Warriors. I ask you to give a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, as I am a Warriors fan. The Warriors could assemble a package around Jonathan Kuminga's contract, a player to supplement the salary cap, and promising young players like Moody, but the question remains, does the front office want to mortgage its future for a player who doesn't significantly guarantee a title shot? Warriors trade proposal lands Zach LaVine in Kings blockbuster. With Sacramento struggling and trade rumors rising, Zach LaVine is back in the headlines. Could the Warriors revisit their past interest? At just over a month into the new NBA season, the trade market is already beginning to take shape, and one name continues to surface with increasing frequency: Zach LaVine. The All-Star guard hasn't had the smoothest transition with the Sacramento Kings, and with the team stumbling to a disappointing 5-15 start, rival executives are already circling, waiting to see how impatient Sacramento's front office may become. The Kings made a bold move to acquire LaVine in the three-team deal that sent shockwaves around the league, but that gamble now sits under scrutiny as the franchise searches for an identity and stability. Why the Warriors' previous interest in Zach LaVine still matters. The Warriors have been a familiar name tied to LaVine dating back to last year, when Golden State reportedly held serious conversations about bringing him to the Bay before ultimately shifting course and securing Jimmy Butler. That decision proved decisive enough to end LaVine's path toward Chase Center, and most insiders believed the door was closed permanently. However, in the modern NBA, nothing stays closed for long. Big contracts, declining timelines, rising frustrations, and shifting ambitions can reopen discussions nearly overnight. Yet despite history and speculation, the current whispers around the league say the Warriors are not expected to re-enter the bidding for LaVine. Jake Fisher reported that Golden State's previous interest evaporated once Butler became available, and league sources suggest that the Warriors see no clear incentive to revisit those LaVine trade talks now. But hypothetically, if the Warriors were to reconsider, would a trade for LaVine even make sense? Can LaVine fix Golden State's offensive identity crisis? To answer that, you must begin with the central tension of the Golden State's current season. The Warriors sit at a modest 11-10, good enough to remain competitive but not nearly assertive enough to feel convincing in the Western Conference hierarchy. The dynasty has aged. Stephen Curry remains elite, but the roster around him continues to fluctuate between development, reinvention, and nostalgia. Draymond Green still anchors the defense when available, but his volatility has reduced his reliability. Jimmy Butler is searching for touch, rhythm, and identity. Jonathan Kuminga and Brandon Podziemski are promising, but still navigating roles rather than defining them. The window is not closed, but it is no longer wide open. Zach LaVine, in theory, represents offensive explosion and shot creation that the Warriors currently lack outside of Curry. His athleticism, three-level scoring, and ability to generate late-clock offense would ease the enormous offensive burden Curry carries nightly. On paper, the idea is attractive. A core of Curry, LaVine, Butler, Green, and supporting depth would make for a dangerous postseason unit capable of surviving defensive storms and enduring scoring droughts. But here is the truth that complicates everything: LaVine's player option. At $48.9 million for the 2026-27 season, executives believe that number is suppressing his trade market. According to Fisher, multiple teams have privately suggested that LaVine could find more suitors willing to part with meaningful assets if he were open to restructuring and lowering his long-term annual salary in exchange for guaranteed years. In other words, he's being treated like a depreciating asset rather than a rising star. Golden State, with its already inflated payroll and luxury tax commitments, would hesitate to take on another long-term financial burden unless the move dramatically increased its title chances. The Warriors' ownership has paid historic luxury penalties before, but doing so again for a player who may not align with their aging timeline could be viewed as fiscally reckless rather than strategically bold. There's also the basketball fit. The Warriors' offensive identity is rooted in movement, rhythm, and passing, not isolation. LaVine is most effective with the ball in his hands, operating as a primary scoring option. In the Golden State, that role belongs unquestionably to Curry, and the ecosystem thrives when players accept roles built around spacing and off-ball creativity. Would LaVine adjust? Could he? And more importantly, would he be willing? Warriors now have sneaky good trade target after Seth Curry signing. The Golden State Warriors now have an even larger guard rotation thanks to the signing of Seth Curry and the imminent return of DeAnthony Melton, leaving an obvious consolidation trade to make to solidify other areas of the roster. Steve Kerr's propensity to remain small means the Warriors should probably avoid big men unless they're a guaranteed 30-minute per game starter. That leaves the forward spots as an obvious area to address, with Najee Marshall presenting as a sneaky good trade target for the franchise on an affordable contract and as someone who could become available given the struggles of the Dallas Mavericks. Najee Marshall could be a sneaky good trade target for the Warriors. Marshall has been a solid two-way player for the Mavericks since his arrival in the 2024 offseason, but he also doesn't totally align with the Cooper Flag era if the franchise tears down their roster, starting with an Anthony Davis trade. Golden State have been floated as a potential destination for Davis by a couple of notable analysts/outlets, yet it's Marshall who's a more realistic and less risky target for the franchise as they look to build a contender around Stephen Curry and Jimmy Butler. Marshall has averaged 12.1 points, 5.2 rebounds, and 2.3 assists in 26.9 minutes for the Mavericks this season, having averaged very similar numbers in his first year with the team. The 27-year-old is far from a significant three-point threat, but he can finish efficiently on the interior in a way that many on the current Warrior roster don't or aren't willing to. Marshall is in the second of a 3-year, $27 million contract, making his salary incredibly similar to that of under-fire Golden State guard Buddy Hield. A third team would need to be involved given the Mavericks are also above the first apron and can't take back more money in a trade, but flipping Hield for Marshall would make some sense for the Warriors. Doing so would retain some defensive and size integrity in different lineups, particularly if Hield becomes even more of a bit-part player anyway once Melton and Curry are added to the mix. It may also provide some reasonable forward insurance if Golden State explore deals for Jonathan Kuminga, which they're likely to do once he's eligible to be traded on January 15. Perhaps the Warriors would prefer to use Hield's contract in addition to Kuminga's and draft capital for a bigger star, but Marshall would be a nice alternative if the front office looks at cheaper targets on lesser money. Warriors have still failed to grant Jimmy Butler the wish he desperately needs. Jimmy needs help. Golden State Warriors head coach Steve Kerr reiterated on Saturday that Jimmy Butler is simply someone who wants to make the right play. The 6X All-Star had been dominant in a 104-96 victory over the New Orleans Pelicans, but it could have been far easier had some of his teammates come along for the ride. The Warriors shot just over 40% from the floor on the night and only 25.5% from three-point range, numbers that would have looked worse if not for the play of Gary Payton II. If Butler is going to play facilitator more than flat-out scorer, particularly with Stephen Curry on the sidelines, then the front office still needs to grant him with a more appropriate roster than what's currently constructed. Warriors still need to grant Jimmy Butler with more consistent role players. Butler finished the night with 10 assists, yet it could have been more given Golden State's shooting issues. Sometimes it's even the shots Butler's teammates don't take, including Brandon Podziemski, whose pump faking and apparent lack of confidence in his jump shot has been a growing frustration among fans. Podziemski did take a season-high 9 three-point attempts against the Pelicans, but the truth is that there's still a lack of consistency from the team's role players that subsequently impacts Butler's strengths as a playmaker. If you look at Butler's last full season in Miami in 2023-24, he played alongside 6 different teammates who shot at least 39.5% from three-point range. The 36-year-old doesn't have one single Golden State teammate doing that right now, with Butler's 43.6% from beyond the arc leading the team ahead of Moses Moody at 39.2%. Butler needs consistent shooting and floor spacing around him to really maximize his game, something that simply hasn't been forthcoming given the Warriors rank 16th in three-point percentage so far this season. Perhaps that's why the front office now feels it's time to bring back Seth Curry, with confirmation that the veteran sharpshooter will sign a rest-of-season deal on Monday. That may go some way to granting Butler his wish, but it's unlikely that Curry emerges as someone who will average more than 15 minutes per game in the rotation. For the moment, Golden State simply need more consistent results from their role players, particularly Podziemski and Moody, who play heavy minutes next to Butler, along with the center duo of Al Horford and Quinton Post, who are shooting less than 32% from three-point range combined to start the season. If these concerns persist until closer to the deadline, though, the Warriors will need to look at exactly what they can do to ensure they have players who can regularly capitalize on the gravity of Butler and the older Curry. Warriors veteran is officially on notice after concerning Seth Curry signing. TF. Seth Curry will officially sign with the Golden State Warriors on Monday for the remainder of the season, bringing an exciting reunion with big brother Steven after the franchise was forced to briefly part ways with the 35-year-old after preseason. However, the Curry signing may not be so exciting for every player on the roster, and particularly Buddy Hield, who is now on notice and growing as a potential trade candidate following a rough start to the season. Buddy Hield must be concerned by Seth Curry signing. Hield has failed to deliver as a veteran sharpshooter to begin his second year with Golden State, having averaged a career-low 7.2 points and 2.0 rebounds on just 40.9% shooting from the floor and 30.8% from three-point range. While it's unlikely that the younger Curry emerges as a true double-digit scorer for the Warriors, he could certainly deliver far greater efficiency after drilling a career-high 45.6% from three-point range with the Charlotte Hornets last season. Curry shoots 43.3% from beyond the arc on his career, ranked 8th all-time and 3rd among current players. Golden State don't have a single player who's shooting 40% or better from three-point range on at least 2.5 attempts this season, while Curry has done that no less than 8 times in his career. Those numbers suggest the Warriors could do with Curry as part of their rotation, but it's going to have to be at the expense of one or two others in an already guard-heavy mix. Hield is already averaging a career-low 17.5 minutes per game, and now faces even more pressure to retain his role in the rotation with the Curry signing, along with the imminent return of DeAnthony Melton, who could be back as soon as next week from his long-term knee injury. If Hield suddenly starts getting DNPs or is limited to a 10 to 12 minutes in the rotation, the front office would be left with no choice but to explore how they could use his $9.2 million salary to upgrade elsewhere on the roster. Hield did show some signs of life with a season-high 20 points on 8 of 13 shooting against the Utah Jazz at the start of the week, but has since scored just 8 points on 13 shots over the last 2 games. Now the 32-year-old has a couple more games to respond and make a statement before both Curry and Melton become legitimate threats to overtake him in the Warriors' rotation. Gary Payton II and the art of cutting off of Jimmy Butler's cleared side isolations. Payton had his season high on points, courtesy of taking full advantage of Butler's advantage creation. Gary Payton II tallied his season high against the New Orleans Pelicans, 19 points on 9 of 14 shooting from the field, to go along with 11 boards in a winning double-double effort. It's no secret that Payton isn't a beacon of self-creation ability. His value as an offensive player relies heavily on one or two main advantage creators who perform the heavy lifting in terms of creating gaps through which the likes of Payton can slip through and finish possessions. In Payton's case, he slipped through gaps both in the figurative and literal sense. With one of the Golden State Warriors' advantage creators sidelined with a quadriceps contusion, they were left with only Jimmy Butler as the sole offensive engine through which everyone else was given good looks. Butler's value in that regard is often misunderstood, mostly through the lens of the contract that the Warriors gave him immediately upon acquiring him last season prior to the trade deadline. Simply put, the higher the contract is, the more Butler should be scoring, especially with Curry's temporary absence. While there is a need for Butler to score when the moment calls for it, his raw scoring ability isn't the sole indicator of his value. With defenses bent on selling out toward him in an effort to force other Warriors players not named Jimmy Butler to score and make decisions, it is extremely paramount that Butler not only makes sure to get the ball to open teammates, it is also crucial that those teammates establish rhythm and flow that will allow them to finish looks created by the advantages that Butler creates. The issue of rhythm and flow isn't Butler's problem. He has been doing his job capably, as is expected of someone who profiles as a secondary advantage creator with Curry around and a primary advantage creator with Curry absent. The real issue lies with everyone else, who have had problems taking advantage of the advantages being generated.